The unexpected invitation. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon in the small Vietnamese neighborhood where Mrs. Hoa lived. A soft breeze rustled through the vibrant green leaves of the mango tree outside her house, carrying the scent of freshly brewed tea wafting from her kitchen. Mrs. Hoa, a woman in her early 70s, sat on her porch in her favorite bamboo chair, watching the slow rhythm of life pass by. Her wrinkled hands, hardened by years of toil, held a cup of jasmine tea, a rare indulgence she allowed herself after decades of raising her children as a single mother. Her house wasn't grand, but it was filled with warmth, memories etched into the peeling walls like poetry, the echoes of her children's laughter, late nights sewing to make ends meet, and the endless meals prepared with love. Just as she sipped on her warm tea, the phone rang. It was an unusual time for a call, and Mrs. Hoa's brow furrowed slightly as she reached for the cordless receiver. "Hello, this is Hoa speaking," she said in her soft yet steady voice. "Hi, Mom," came the cheerful voice on the other end. It was her eldest son, Min, currently living in America with his wife, Sarah. Min had always been the overachiever in the family, the filial son who worked hard, got a scholarship abroad, and later built a life in the bustling streets of Los Angeles. Min rarely called, as he was often too busy with work, not out of neglect, but perhaps because the miles between them had become symbolic of the emotional distance. "Min!" Her voice lit up with joy. "How are you? How's Sarah? Everything good over there?" "We're good, Mom. Busy as always, but Sarah and I have been talking about you a lot lately," Min began, his voice tinged with a smile she could almost feel through the phone. "We were thinking, you've never been to America, have you?" Mrs. Hoa paused, her fingers tightening slightly around the cup of tea. "America? No, son, I've barely left Vietnam. Why do you bring that up?" "Well," Min chuckled lightly as if he were building up to something big. "Sarah and I have decided that it's time for you to come and visit us here. We want to take you on a trip around America." There was a sharp intake of breath on Mrs. Hoa's end. Her heart stopped for a brief second, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Did her hard-working son, the one who'd always complained about tight budgets, just say what she thought he did? "Go to America?" she repeated slowly, her voice filled with disbelief. "Me? Min, are you serious?" "I'm serious, Mom." Min's tone softened, more heartfelt this time. "We've been saving for this. You've given us everything, the best years of your life, sacrificed so much for me and my siblings, and we realized it's time we do something for you. It's our turn to take care of you, Mom." Tears welled up in Mrs. Hoa's eyes, and she laughed nervously to hide them. What Min said meant more to her than he could have possibly known. After all those long, sleepless nights scrimping and saving to put him through school, this gesture, this acknowledgement of her years of sacrifice, felt like everything she had hoped parenting would someday reward her with. "But Min, airplane tickets, travel, it must cost so much," she replied cautiously, unwilling to let her son shoulder such a burden. "Mom, don't worry about the cost," Min reassured her. "Sarah and I already bought the tickets, we'll handle everything. You just need to pack a bag and get ready for the adventure of a lifetime." For a moment, the world stood still. Her mind raced, equal parts excitement and doubt, as visions of grand skyscrapers, endless highways, and the Statue of Liberty flashed in her thoughts. Could she really do this? A woman who had never left Asia, who struggled with English, and who at times felt out of place even in her hometown, now embarking on a transcontinental journey to the United States? "Min," she began, her voice trembling with a mix of gratitude and hesitation. "Are you really sure? You've thought this through, haven't you?" "Mom," Min said simply, "you've sacrificed your dreams for us your entire life. It's time you finally have a dream of your own. And this is going to be it. Just say yes." Mrs. Hoa's laughter bubbled up again as she wiped away tears that now rolled freely down her face. It wasn't the laughter of humor, but of overwhelming emotion, a release of everything she had bottled up over the years. At that moment she felt something she hadn't felt in decades, the thrilling promise of something new, something just for her. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady and full of resolve. "Yes, Min, I'll go to America." "Great!" Min exclaimed. "I can't wait! Oh, and Sarah says hi, she's so excited to show you around. We've been planning this for weeks." As Min continued to talk about their plans, Mrs. Hoa leaned back into her bamboo chair and gazed out at the blue sky, her thoughts now filled with dreams of the unknown. The fear of the unfamiliar lingered at the corners of her mind, but it was quickly replaced by an excitement that bloomed anew. For the first time in years, Mrs. Hoa felt like the heroine of her own story. A flight full of joy. The taxi pulled up to the bustling international airport, its bright fluorescent lights illuminating the midnight air. Mrs. Hoa stepped out, clutching her small, neatly packed suitcase. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar thrill of adventure. Min and Sarah stood on either side of her, each with their own carry-ons, exuding excitement and reassurance. "Mom, you ready?" Min asked, his voice both playful and encouraging. Mrs. Hoa turned to him, her lips curving into a nervous smile. "I think so. It's my first time on a plane, Min. Don't laugh if I look like a fool." She clutched the straps of her favorite embroidered handbag tightly. "Mom, you'll do great," Sarah chimed in, flashing a warm smile. "By the time we land, you'll be a pro." The journey through the terminal was an adventure in itself. Mrs. Hoa stared at the enormous glass walls that reflected the glimmer of planes and the constant motion of travelers. The conveyor belts, the announcements over the intercom, and the buzzing energy of the airport were all so foreign, yet oddly exhilarating. "Min, look at that plane outside, it's so big," she said in awe, pointing through the window toward a towering aircraft. "How does that even stay in the air? It's like magic." "It's not magic, Mom, it's physics," Min teased, laughing softly. "Don't worry, it's perfectly safe." The check-in and security clearance felt like a whirlwind. Mrs. Hoa fretted over removing her shoes and placing them into the bin. "This is so strange. Why do they need my shoes?" she muttered, slightly embarrassed, as Min and Sarah chuckled kindly. "It's just procedure, Mom," Sarah reassured. "They're making sure everyone's safe. You'll get used to it." Once they navigated the chaos and found their gate, Mrs. Hoa felt herself relax just a little. The three of them sat in a quiet corner overlooking the tarmac, and Min handed her a cup of warm green tea from the airport cafe. "Here, Mom," he said, placing the cup in her hands. "I figured this might make you feel at home while we wait." Mrs. Hoa smiled warmly, savoring the familiar aroma. "You think of everything, don't you?" she said, her voice softer now that her earlier nerves were starting to fade. When boarding time was announced, Min helped her gather her things. As they lined up and proceeded into the plane's grand entryway, Mrs. Hoa stole glances at the bustling flight attendants and the neatly arranged seats. She tried to nod politely at anyone who looked her way, though her unease was still evident. Seated by the window, Mrs. Hoa marveled at the sheer size of the plane's cabin. She had seen airplanes in the sky and on TV, but being inside one was another experience entirely. "Now this," she started, fumbling with her armrest and seatbelt. "This feels surreal. Min, what if I can't sleep, or what if my ears hurt?" Min patted her shoulder. "Mom, it'll be fine, just chew some gum when we take off, and if you can't sleep, I'll be right next to you. We can talk the whole night. Or, I'll put a movie on for you, Mom," Sarah added. "There's a little screen on the seat, see this remote? You can watch anything you like, even old Vietnamese movies." Her eyes widened in amusement as Sarah demonstrated, scrolling through the entertainment system. "Ah, you young people and your technology," Mrs. Hoa chuckled. As the engines roared to life, the overhead lights dimmed slightly, and an announcement came over the speakers instructing everyone to fasten their seatbelts. Mrs. Hoa tightened the strap across her lap, gripping the armrests, as the plane rumbled and began its taxi toward the runway. "Are we going now?" she whispered to Min, her voice trembling slightly. "Not yet, Mom, they're just getting ready," Min explained gently. "But when we start moving, take a deep breath and look out the window. The view is going to blow your mind." And then it happened. With an exhilarating surge, the plane sped down the runway and lifted into the endless night sky. Mrs. Hoa's breath caught in her throat as the ground fell away beneath them. Lights from the city sparkled like stars below, and for the first time she truly felt like she had left her world behind. "Min!" she gasped, clutching his hand. It's beautiful." "I told you, Mom," he said with a grin. "Welcome to your first flight." As the plane leveled off and the seatbelt sign turned off, flight attendants began their service, offering drinks and snacks. Sarah took over translating for Mrs. Hoa, who was fascinated by everything, from the foldable tray table to the little cups of orange juice. "This is all so fancy," Mrs. Hoa said, poking a plastic cup of salad with her fork. "It's like being treated like royalty." "That's how it should be, Mom," Min said with a wink. "You deserve it." Throughout the flight, Mrs. Hoa alternated between chatting with Min and Sarah, dozing lightly, and staring out the window at the vast darkness dotted with occasional clusters of lights. She reminisced about her younger days, stories of her struggles raising her children, and the dreams she once had but put aside. She spoke of all the sacrifices she made, and Min listened quietly, his heart heavy with gratitude and a tinge of guilt. "You've done more for us than we could ever repay, Mom," he said finally. "This trip is just one small way of showing you how much you mean to us." The words lingered in her mind as the hours passed. Long after both Min and Sarah had fallen asleep, Mrs. Hoa remained awake, staring out into the endless expanse of stars above the clouds. This wasn't just a trip, she realized. It was a journey into a new chapter of her life, one where she might finally allow herself to dream again. For the first time in decades, she felt the thrill of possibility. And it was all thanks to the son she had once carried on her back through muddy fields and rainy nights, who was now flying her across oceans to show her the world. Arriving in America, after countless hours in the air, the plane finally began its descent. The overhead announcements filled the cabin, and the flight attendants walked the aisles, ensuring everyone was prepared for landing. Mrs. Hoa stared out of the small oval window, her eyes wide with amazement. "Min, look at all those lights!" she exclaimed, pointing out the window as the sprawling city of Los Angeles came into view. It's like the stars fell down from the sky to cover the ground." Min chuckled at her excitement. "That's LA, Mom. Wait until you see it up close. It's even better from the ground." Mrs. Hoa couldn't contain her fascination. Skyscrapers, highways illuminated by endless streams of cars and glittering cityscapes stretched out as far as her eyes could see. It was a sight completely unlike anything she had ever imagined. It looked so alive, so impossibly vast. "When you see this kind of place on TV screens," she whispered almost to herself, "it doesn't look this big. It's like I've shrunk into a speck of dust." "Big experiences make some things feel small," Sarah said warmly, leaning across Min to join the conversation. "It just means this is going to be a big adventure for you, Mrs. Hoa." Moments later, the plane touched down with a smooth shudder. Mrs. Hoa tightened her grip on the armrest during the landing and let out a small nervous laugh as the passengers erupted into a polite round of applause. "We made it," she said with an almost disbelieving smile. "Yes, Mom," Min replied, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Welcome to America." As they exited the plane and stepped into the spacious, high-ceiling terminal of Los Angeles International Airport, Mrs. Hoa kept staring in awe. She trailed behind Min and Sarah, clutching her suitcase like a lifeline, as her eyes darted from one marvel to another. What is that?" she suddenly exclaimed, pointing at a passing traveler standing on a moving walkway. "Are they walking? Or floating?" "It's a conveyor belt, Mom," Sarah said, stifling a giggle. "It's for people who don't want to walk all that way." Mrs. Hoa cautiously stepped onto one with Min holding her elbow gently. As the walkway propelled her forward, she marveled, wobbling slightly at first but gradually relaxing. "It's like magic," she muttered in awe. "America has all kinds of conveniences, Mom. You'll get used to it," Min replied, tugging her suitcase as they reached the escalator. "Just watch your step here." "I feel like I'm in a movie already," she said softly, glancing at a large electronic advertisement showing the Hollywood sign. The massive billboards, the polished floors reflecting neon lights, the sound of different languages floating in the air, it all seemed surreal. Walking through the terminal, Mrs. Hoa stopped every now and then to look at something new. At one point she froze in front of an elaborate coffee stand, mesmerized by the long list of drink options. "Mocha? Caramel? Vanilla latte? Min, what's a pumpkin spice?" she asked, reading out loud with a tone of complete wonderment. "Pumpkin spice? It's like a sweet flavor with cinnamon, nutmeg, and other spices," Min chuckled. "I'll get you one later, Mom." "And the coffee is so big," she added, gesturing toward another passenger holding a cup the size of her head. "Will I even be able to finish that?" As they moved farther into the airport's main hall, the noise of the crowd grew louder. There were people everywhere, rolling luggage, talking on phones, rushing to meet loved ones, or trying to find their gates. The sheer busyness of it all overwhelmed Mrs. Hoa for a moment, but Min placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, Mom, just stay with us. I feel like I'll get lost here," she said nervously, gripping Min's arm tightly. "It's nothing like home." "You've got nothing to worry about," Min reassured, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "Sarah and I are with you." They approached customs, which proved to be an entirely new experience for Mrs. Hoa. Sarah held up her phone, explaining the process to her step-by-step. "Okay, Mom, stand here," Sarah said, pointing to a line where travelers were showing passports. "What will they ask? Do I have to speak English? What if I say something wrong?" Mrs. Hoa whispered with visible concern. Min smiled. "Just smile, Mom. I'll explain everything to them. You don't need to say much." True to his word, Min guided her through the process. When it was her turn to pose for a photo, she stood stiffly, her expression a mix of pride and worry. "Am I in trouble?" she whispered to Min as the officer stared at his computer screen. The officer handed her back her stamped documents with a polite nod. Welcome to the United States. Mrs. Hoa exhaled sharply in relief. Min grinned. See? Nothing to worry about. When they finally emerged into the arrivals hall, Mrs. Hoa's senses were further bombarded by the cacophony of airport announcements, the jingling of suitcases, and the chatter in 100 different accents. She felt dwarfed by the vastness of the space and the seemingly endless throng of people. But her heart was light. She was here. She had made it. Min flagged down a waiting airport shuttle, and as they climbed aboard, Mrs. Hoa took her seat by the window. The lights of Los Angeles spilled out before her, painting a mesmerizing portrait of the city at night. "So this is America," she murmured to herself, her voice full of wonder. "This is just the start, Mom," Min said excitedly. "We've got so much to show you." As the shuttle pulled into the night, she couldn't help but smile. The nervousness of the journey was beginning to fade, and in its place, an excitement she hadn't felt in years began to take root. For the first time in a long time, Mrs. Hoa felt ready to embrace the unknown. "Let's see what this big world has to offer," she whispered, half to herself, half to the glittering skyline beyond. The mysterious disappearance. The early morning air inside the airport was already alive with movement. Travelers rushed past with rolling luggage, families embraced joyfully at reunions. The constant hum of announcements overhead mingled with the sound of distant laughter. But for Mrs. Hoa, stepping into this strange, towering terminal had been overwhelming, thrilling, and overwhelmingly thrilling. "Mom, sit here." Min carefully guided her to a bench near the baggage claim area. "Sarah and I are just going to grab the car from the parking garage. It's just over there." He pointed vaguely toward some far-off exit. Mrs. Hoa nodded, shifting the strap of her embroidered handbag across her shoulder. She let out a small laugh, trying to mask her nervousness. "You two don't take too long, okay? What if I forget where I'm sitting? This place is so big," she said, her voice half joking but half filled with genuine concern. "Don't worry, Mom, just wait here. We'll come back right away," Sarah said, smiling reassuringly. "We'll be back in no time, won't we, Min?" "Of course," Min reassured her. "We'll be quick, just relax. Maybe chat with some Americans and practice your English." He laughed lightly. Mrs. Hoa waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, stop teasing me. I can barely say hello without feeling shy. Go on, go get the car." Min nodded and then turned toward Sarah. "Let's go, the garage is just a quick walk." Mrs. Hoa watched them disappear into the bustling sea of travelers. She adjusted herself on the cold aluminum bench and clutched the handle of her neatly packed suitcase, her heart still fluttering from the long flight. For the first time in her life she was on foreign soil, and though she had spent most of her journey filled with excitement, a strange uneasiness now crept into her thoughts. The minutes passed. She studied the crowd moving past her, their faces unfamiliar, and their voices blending into a cacophony of languages she couldn't understand. Trying to stay calm, Mrs. Hoa glanced toward the doors where Min and Sarah had vanished. She told herself it would only take a few more minutes. To pass the time, she opened her handbag and pulled out a small packet of dried mango slices she had brought from Vietnam. As she chewed thoughtfully, an older couple next to her gave her a courteous smile. She managed to smile back timidly before refocusing on the terminal doors. 5 minutes became 10. 10 stretched uncomfortably into 15. They're taking a while," Mrs. Hoa muttered under her breath, craning her neck to better see the entrance. Maybe the garage is farther than Min thought. She adjusted her scarf and placed the empty packet of dried fruit back into her bag. A creeping feeling of impatience began to bubble inside her. By 20 minutes the sense of uneasiness returned stronger this time, like an unwelcome whisper at the back of her mind. Mrs. Hoa stood up, gripping the edge of her suitcase tightly. Her eyes darted back and forth down the terminal. The crowds of travelers ebbed and flowed, but Min and Sarah were nowhere to be seen, her brow furrowed. Surely they wouldn't get lost, would they? She whispered to herself. A kind-looking young airport worker in a navy blue uniform passed by, and Mrs. Hoa hesitated briefly before stopping him. "Excuse me, can you help me?" she asked in broken and hesitant English, pointing toward the exit signs. "Parking garage? Min, my son? Over there?" The worker smiled kindly but seemed confused by her fragmented words. "Oh, the parking garage. Is someone meeting you? Are you lost, ma'am?" "No, no lost." Mrs. Hoa shook her head. "My son, Min. He go to car garage, but it's long. I wait. Long." "Ah, I see." The worker nodded. "Maybe the garage is busy. Give them a little more time, ma'am." Mrs. Hoa nodded reluctantly, thanking him before sitting back down, but she felt far from reassured. She opened her bag, looking once more for her phone. Her fingers fumbled nervously as they pressed Min's number. The line rang, and rang. "Come on, Min, pick up," she muttered under her breath. A voicemail clicked on. His voice sounded lighthearted and cheerful in the recording, a stark contrast to the heavy silence that followed after the beep. "Min, it's me, Mom. Where are you? The parking. Too long. Call me." She hung up. The worry was now trailing dangerously close to panic. An hour, 2 hours, no calls, no messages. Mrs. Hoa found herself pacing near the luggage carousel, her anxious feet tracing repetitive circles as she scanned the ever-changing crowds for any sign of Min and Sarah. Her heart raced with every passing moment. "Excuse me, sir?" she called out to another airport worker. Her voice trembled now with barely hidden desperation. Again she tried to explain the situation, fumbling over words. "Son, gone. Parking, Min, wife, very long. No call." The worker, a middle-aged man trying his best to understand her, asked gently, "Do you have their phone number? Maybe I can call them for you?" Mrs. Hoa handed him her little flip phone. For the first time tears welled up in her eyes, threatening to spill as the airport worker dialed the number. Again there was no answer. "Maybe they got held up," he suggested politely, though his tone carried doubt. Mrs. Hoa shook her head, speaking more to herself than to him. "Min wouldn't leave me, he promised. No, maybe something bad happened. Accident?" The man hesitated. "You could report it to airport security, ma'am, if you're worried." "Security? Report Min?" That thought sounded absurd to Mrs. Hoa. She shook her head. "No, no trouble. I wait a little. They come back." But they didn't. By the time the long shadows of the afternoon began to stretch across the terminal windows, Mrs. Hoa's confidence had crumbled into pieces. Fear gnawed at her heart as she clutched her suitcase tightly. She tried Min's phone again, and again she was met only with the cold emptiness of voicemail. For the first time the possibility crossed her mind, one so unthinkable that she immediately pushed it away. "No, Min would never leave me, never," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It's just taking longer." Even as her words tried to reassure her, deep inside, she knew the truth was crawling toward her like an unwelcome shadow. They were gone. Min and Sarah had disappeared. And for the first time, Mrs. Hoa was completely and utterly alone. Her legs felt weak as she lowered herself back onto the bench she had been sitting on for hours. The hustle and bustle of the airport, once so exciting, now felt like a cruel, indifferent backdrop to her growing despair. She buried her face in her hands. The realization was too sharp, too painful to absorb all at once. Min, her son, the one she had raised with endless love, the one for whom she gave up her youth and her dreams, had left her here, left her in a strange country, alone. The warm tears that streaked down her face felt bitter, no longer tears of worry or confusion, but now the raw, stinging tears of betrayal. Her lips trembled as she whispered aloud to no one, "Why, Min? Why would you do this to me?" Facing the truth, the night crept along like a slow-moving shadow, and Mrs. Hoa sat numbly on the cold steel bench in the airport terminal, her suitcase resting by her feet. Hours had passed since Min and Sarah had left her with the promise to return. The buzzing energy of the airport, once exciting and unfamiliar, now felt cruel. The laughter of passers-by, the hurried footsteps, the calls of family members embracing each other, all of it made her feel dreadfully alone. Mrs. Hoa's flip phone lay idle in her lap. She had called Min's number more times than she could count, each call ending in the same frustrating monotone. "The number you dialed is not available. Please leave a message after the beep." She had left messages. Pleading, panicked messages. No one called back. Her stomach clenched with hunger, but the thought of food was unbearable. She tightened her thin scarf around her shoulders as the cool air from the terminal vents chilled her bones. She clenched her fists and muttered softly in Vietnamese, a plea to herself. "Stay calm, Hoa, stay calm, there must be an explanation." But the explanation she wanted never came. The sinking feeling in her chest refused to leave, a weight pressing down harder with every passing hour. A security officer, a tall man in his 40s wearing a friendly smile, approached her. "Ma'am, are you all right? You've been sitting here for a long time. Do you need assistance?" Mrs. Hoa looked up, startled. Her English, still shaky at best, faltered as she tried to respond. Waiting. My son," she stammered. "Min, my son. Parking garage." Her words trailed off. The officer watched her with a mix of concern and confusion. "Your son? Are you lost? Do you need help finding him?" No, she said hurriedly, holding up her palms. "Not lost. Wait here. He not come back." Her voice cracked as she finished the sentence, and she quickly looked away, embarrassed by the tears building in her eyes. The officer crouched slightly to meet her gaze. "How long have you been waiting?" Mrs. Hoa glanced at the clock on the wall. She blinked, shocked by the realization. 10. No, 11 hours. The officer frowned. 11 hours and you haven't heard from him? No calls. Sitting there, saying those words out loud to a stranger made it feel even more real. She swallowed hard, fighting back another wave of tears. You really shouldn't have to wait this long, the officer said gently. Do you have his phone number? Maybe I can try to contact him. Mrs. Hoa hesitated for a moment but then handed him her phone. The officer dialed Min's number. She held her breath, her fingers clamped tightly around the edge of her scarf as the call rang. Once, twice, and then went straight to voicemail, just as it had for her. I'm sorry, ma'am, the officer said softly, handing back the phone. Your son isn't answering. Mrs. Hoa dropped her head into her hands, her shoulders trembling. She whispered, mostly to herself, How could this happen? Why would they leave me? The officer sat down beside her, glancing around before speaking again. Ma'am, are you sure nothing happened? Maybe they were delayed or lost track of time, or maybe there's been some kind of mix-up. I could report this to airport authorities and have them make an announcement. The possibility of hearing Min's name echoed through the terminal over the loudspeakers briefly gave Mrs. Ho hope, but she shook her head. Something deep inside her told her this wasn't a mistake. Min and Sarah weren't coming back. Still, she couldn't bring herself to say the words aloud. Not yet. It felt too final, too unbearable. I don't know, she finally said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I just don't know. The officer pressed gently, hoping to reassure her. It could still be okay. People get delayed all the time. If they're stuck in traffic or... Mrs. Hoa cut him off, her voice firmer this time. No, it's not traffic. It's not that. She felt the weight of the truth start to sink deeper into her chest. Her son, the boy she had sacrificed so much for, had left her here, abandoned her. The officer studied her face, his expression shifting to one of quiet understanding. He reached for a clipboard strapped to his waist. All right, ma'am, maybe we should file some sort of report, just in case. Mrs. Hoa waved a trembling hand. No, she said softly. What can they do? They can't bring him back. There was a long silence. Mrs. Hoa's mind raced with memories of Min. She thought of the late nights she had spent sewing clothes so he could have school supplies, the bowls of soup she had gone without to make sure he had enough, and the countless times she had stayed by his side when he was sick as a child. How had it come to this? How could someone she had loved so much leave her at an airport, in a land where she didn't even speak the language? Another hour passed. Mrs. Hoa didn't move from the bench. She stared at the automatic glass doors, watching weary travelers rush to meet family and friends on the other side. The officer occasionally checked in with her, but otherwise she was left alone with her thoughts. It wasn't until a kind woman working at one of the coffee kiosks approached her that Mrs. Hoa finally stood. The woman, noticing her distress, offered her a hot cup of tea and a small plate of pastries. You've been sitting here all day. Are you okay, ma'am? Mrs. Hoa hesitated, then took the tea with both hands, bowing slightly in silent thanks. She didn't trust herself to speak. The warm tea was soothing, but it couldn't erase the gnawing ache in her chest. When she finally spoke, her words were barely audible. I think my son is gone. The woman sat beside her, concern flashing across her face. Gone? You mean... I don't know why, Mrs. Hoa said, struggling to hold back sobs. He left me. They left me here. The woman placed a gentle hand on Mrs. Hoa's shoulder, her kindness cutting through the overwhelming despair for just a brief moment. I'm so sorry, the woman said softly. Do you have anyone you can call? Someone back home? Mrs. Hoa shook her head. Her thoughts were scattered, fragmented. The only phone numbers she knew were too far away to help. For the first time in her life, the idea of truly being alone, without family, without a home to return to, settled like a heavy stone in her chest. Her son wasn't just physically gone, he had chosen to leave her, and that realization shattered her in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. As the night deepened, Mrs. Hoa closed her eyes and clutched the cup of tea tightly. The only thing she could do now was face the truth. She had been abandoned. A time of hardship. The fluorescent lights of the airport shone dully against the cold, tiled floors as the hours dragged into days. Mrs. Hoa remained in the terminal, a small figure with a neatly packed suitcase by her side and pain etched deeply into her face. She hadn't left the bench, still clinging to the faint hope that perhaps Min and Sarah would return with some explanation that would make all of this feel like a bad dream. But they didn't. By the second day, the airport staff started to notice her more. Her presence was no longer a fleeting image passing through their shifts. She became a constant, a quiet, weary woman who barely spoke. Some pitied her, Some whispered among themselves, wondering what her story was, and others simply avoided the awkwardness of asking questions they weren't sure they could handle the answers to. "What's her deal?" one young custodian asked as he cleared a nearby trash can. "I don't know," replied a cafe worker, glancing toward where Mrs. Hoa sat. "She's been here since yesterday morning. I think maybe she's waiting for someone. Or maybe someone left her," the custodian added softly. His voice carried no judgment, only quiet sadness. Mrs. Hoa sat silently, her eyes following the endless rhythm of travelers walking by. Her stomach growled, but she didn't have the energy to reach into her bag for the last few snacks she had brought from home. Sleep came in short bursts, each time interrupted by the screech of suitcase wheels or the hum of an announcement over the loudspeakers. Her thin scarf did little to protect her from the terminal's air-conditioned chill, and the hard metal bench offered no comfort. On the afternoon of the second day, a friendly airline worker approached her, holding a styrofoam box. "Hi, ma'am," the young woman said, crouching slightly to meet Mrs. Hoa's tired gaze. Her name tag read, Jasmine Morales. "I noticed you've been sitting here for a while. You must be hungry. I brought you something to eat." Mrs. Hoa blinked up at the woman, startled by the gesture. She hesitated before murmuring in broken English, "Oh, no need, I'm fine." Jasmine smiled gently and set the box down next to her anyway. "It's okay. It's just rice and chicken. It's not much, but you should eat, okay?" Mrs. Hoa stared at the box for a few moments before finally nodding. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice so quiet it was almost inaudible. She opened the box and picked at the food with small, timid bites. Though it was warm and flavorful, she barely tasted it. Her mind was too clouded with thoughts. Later that evening, as the lights of the terminal dimmed slightly for the approaching night, another airport worker came by, this time a security guard. He was older, with lines around his eyes that hinted at both kindness and years of experience. His name tag read Richard Evans. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, sitting on the bench a respectful distance away from her. "I've been watching you for a bit now. You've been here for over a day, haven't you? Are you sure you don't need help?" Mrs. Hoa hesitated, her eyes darting toward her suitcase. "No," she said softly. "I wait for son. He come back." Her English cracked under the weight of her emotions. Richard rubbed the back of his neck, unsure how to proceed. "Listen, I don't want to intrude, but it's not really safe for you to stay here like this. Do you have a place you can go, a hotel, someone you can call?" "No hotel, no call," Mrs. Hoa replied, her voice trembling. "Just me. Min promised come back." The quiet use of her son's name made Richard's chest tighten. He nodded slowly, realizing there was little he could do to convince her otherwise. "Okay," he said carefully. "Do you need anything at all? Water, food? I can at least help with that." Mrs. Hoa shook her head. "I'm okay, thank you." But she wasn't okay. Not really. Every hour that passed, the reality of being abandoned pressed more heavily on her heart. She tried to push it away, clinging to excuses she made up in her mind. Maybe they got stuck in traffic. Maybe there was an accident. Maybe they'll be here in the morning. The night passed slowly and Mrs. Hoa found herself unable to sleep. She sat huddled in her scarf, staring at the same monotonous view of travelers streaming past her as if they were part of an endless tide. Her thoughts spiraled, replaying memories of Min's childhood. She remembered the way his tiny hands used to cling to her as she carried him through the muddy streets of their village during monsoon season. She remembered how proud he was the first time he came home with good grades from school, and how she had stayed up late sewing extra shirts to sell so she could buy him the books he needed. Those memories felt like an ache now, a bittersweet reminder of everything she had done for him, for all her children. By the morning of the third day, her exhaustion had reached its peak. She barely heard the worker at the nearby cafe calling out, "Ma'am, are you all right?" It was Jasmine again, holding a cup of steaming coffee and a soft muffin wrapped in tissue paper. "Here," the young woman said, placing them gently in front of Mrs. Hoa. "You look like you really need some energy." Mrs. Hoa didn't argue this time. She cradled the cup of coffee in her hands, letting the warmth seep into her cold skin. After a long sip, she looked up at Jasmine and said, "Thank you, you are kind." Jasmine smiled warmly. "It's nothing. I just want to make sure you're okay. Are you traveling alone?" Mrs. Hoa hesitated before nodding. "Son promised come back. But he not here." Jasmine's brows furrowed in concern. She sat down next to Mrs. Hoa, her voice softer this time. "I'm so sorry, that must be very hard. Do you have anyone else you can call? Family back home?" Mrs. Hoa thought for a moment, her eyes welling up with tears. "Vietnam, far away, no help, just me." Jasmine reached out and placed a gentle hand on Mrs. Hoa's arm. I can't imagine how hard this must be for you, but you're not alone here, okay? There are people who care, even strangers like me." For the first time in days, Mrs. Hoa felt something shift inside her. It was small, a faint glimmer that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way forward, even in this foreign, overwhelming place. The endless hours of hardship in the airport weren't just physical. They were emotional wounds that deepened with each fleeting hope. However, the small acts of kindness, the warm meals, and the gentle faces of strangers reminded Mrs. Hoa of something she had almost forgotten, that not all bonds were tied by family. Sometimes, strangers could give her what she needed most: simple compassion. Even in the harshest of times, Mrs. Hoa clung to that faint thread of humanity. Though she didn't yet know where her journey would lead, she understood one thing: she would endure. She had to. A bitter return. The hum of the airplane engines pressed softly against Mrs. Hoa's eardrums as she sat by the window, staring into the pitch-black sky outside. Tiny pinpricks of stars blinked faintly through the glass, but for Mrs. Hoa, the darkness of the heavens felt like it mirrored the emptiness in her heart. She clutched a cup of hot tea in her trembling hands, the ceramic mug slightly too warm against her cold skin, but it was comforting in a way no words could be. After several frantic days of trying to survive in a foreign country, she was finally on her way home, back to Vietnam. But this wasn't the joyous reunion she had once imagined when she thought about returning to the comfort of her village. Instead, it was a bitter retreat, one marked by broken trust and unbearable heartache. She exhaled slowly, her breath shaky, as a flight attendant passed by and smiled down at her kindly. "Would you like anything else, ma'am?" the young stewardess asked in English. Mrs. Hoa shook her head gently, her lips forced into a polite, almost distant smile. "No. Thank you," she answered softly, her accent faint but poignant. The girl smiled and pushed her cart down the aisle, leaving Mrs. Hoa alone with her thoughts once again. Min's voice still echoed in her mind. She could hear his words from the countless voicemails she had left him, words she clung to at the time, a desperate plea to understand why her own son, her flesh and blood, would leave her stranded in a foreign land. Her hand instinctively moved to the small flip phone in her lap, the one she had gripped tightly throughout this ordeal. The screen was cracked, its battery dying, but it symbolized her last shred of connection to him, and to the family she thought she could always rely on. The questions tortured her, looping over and over in her mind like a broken record. Was it something I did? Did I fail him? She thought of the sacrifices she had made over the years, the sleepless nights spent stitching clothes to earn enough money for his education, the meals she skipped so her children could have enough to eat. She thought about the countless hours she spent dreaming of their futures, and the pride she felt when Min got married, moved abroad, and built a life that seemed so promising. But now, that life had come at her expense. The voice of the captain came over the intercom, announcing their descent into Vietnam. The plane dipped slightly, and Mrs. Hoa tightened her grip on the armrests. The hot tea she had clung to earlier had now grown cold, forgotten on the foldable tray in front of her. Her fellow passengers began adjusting their seats and preparing for landing, some chatting excitedly about their arrival. But she sat in silence, her heart a heavy stone, and gazed out the window instead. Below, the lights of her homeland began to emerge, tiny, scattered patches of orange and yellow glowing faintly in the pre-dawn fog. The sight that once would have filled her with warmth now felt painfully hollow. She was going home, but it didn't feel like a return to safety this time. It felt like retreating to a life she thought she had left behind for something better. When the plane landed and the cabin lights brightened, Mrs. Hoa instinctively reached for her belongings. Her suitcase was a modest one, lightly packed for what was intended to be a short visit, filled with thoughtful gifts for Min and Sarah. She chuckled bitterly under her breath, remembering the small lacquered boxes and embroidered scarves she had so carefully chosen for them. They were still tucked inside, unused. How pointless, she thought. They didn't need these gifts. They needed me for something else. Perhaps something to take, not cherish. The bitterness of that realization made her throat tighten. As the other passengers filed off the plane, some chatting with excitement, others exhausted, Mrs. Hoa lingered for a moment longer in her seat. She wasn't ready to face the world outside. "Ma'am?" A flight attendant lightly touched her shoulder. "It's time to deboard." She nodded weakly, lifting her suitcase and handbag as she shuffled down the narrow aisle. Every step toward the exit felt heavier, as though her body carried not just her own weight, but all the years of love, sacrifice, and hope she had burdened herself with for her children. Stepping out into Tan Son Nhut Airport, Mrs. Hoa was greeted by the thick, humid air of her homeland. It clung to her skin like a familiar but unwelcome embrace. The chatter of people speaking Vietnamese surrounded her, but it provided no comfort. Despite being back on home soil, she still felt lost. A small group of taxi drivers called out to her as she exited the arrivals hall, offering rides with overly eager gestures. "Taxi dao, Koi! Mo chuyen venane!" She waved them off politely. "Vena," she muttered to herself. Her voice was flat, and the words held a weight she didn't fully comprehend until now. She was going home, but how much of it could still truly feel like home? Her house still stood as she had left it, a humble place in the countryside with its peeling shutters and a garden overgrown from months of neglect. Mrs. Hoa stepped inside, placing her suitcase quietly by the door. The familiar smell of the wooden walls greeted her, mingling with the faint aroma of dried herbs she had hung months ago. She slumped onto the small bamboo chair by the window, the same chair where she used to sit and mend clothes for her children years ago. The silence of the house was deafening. There were no warm voices, no laughter, no one rushing to greet her. She thought, miserably, about how different this homecoming could have been had things gone another way. Had Min and Sarah welcomed her in America with the same love she had given them all her life, she might have returned bursting with exciting stories to tell the neighbors. Instead, she returned with nothing but questions and the bitter taste of betrayal. As she sat there, staring at the dusty floor beneath her feet, Mrs. Hoa felt the weight of her decision settle in her chest. She had already contacted a lawyer to discuss selling the house, her house, the one she had worked tirelessly to buy, but had legally signed over to Min years ago. She would no longer let it remain a symbol of power for a son who could abandon her so easily. Tears welled up in her eyes as the memories of raising Min, of holding his small hand in hers, clawed their way to the surface. But for the first time she didn't suppress those tears. She let them fall freely down her face, soaking the fabric of her scarf. This wasn't just a homecoming, it was a reckoning. Returning to Vietnam was supposed to take her back to familiarity and love, but all she found waiting for her was an empty house and the faint echoes of the family she had once believed in. The pain of what happened in America would take years to fade, but as Mrs. Hoa stared out her window at the sunrise blazing over the rice fields, she promised herself one thing: she wouldn't let this pain define her. Min may have abandoned her, but she resolved at that moment to claim back her dignity and move forward, one painful step at a time. A resolute decision to cut ties. The morning light seeped gently through the curtains of Mrs. Hoa's small, humble home. The warmth of the sun should have felt comforting, like an embrace from the universe, but to Mrs. Hoa, it only illuminated the stillness around her. There was no laughter, no voices calling out, "May-oi," to greet her as she used to imagine after a long trip. There was only silence, a kind she was beginning to grow both accustomed to and utterly resentful of. Sitting at her small wooden table, clutching a teacup in her trembling hands, Mrs. Hoa stared down at the documents in front of her. These pieces of paper represented years of hard work and sacrifice. Beneath the decorated text and formal tone, they declared legal ownership of her house, a house that she had selflessly signed over to Min years ago, trusting her son and believing his words when he promised to always care for her. But those words had become as fragile and meaningless as petals scattered by the wind. Min had broken that trust, leaving her not just stranded in a foreign land but emotionally abandoned in the most profound sense. Sitting alone in the emptiness of a home that no longer felt like hers, she realized something she never thought she'd have to consider. She would have to take it all back. The decision wasn't an easy one. It never could be. As a mother, Mrs. Hoa knew she was supposed to forgive, to love unconditionally. Her identity had been built on sacrificing her happiness for the well-being of her children. But how far could that sacrifice go? Could she continue to endure the pain of betrayal while holding on to a false hope that Min would come back, offering an apology that may never come? No, she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible but firm. It stops here. She pushed the teacup aside and straightened the stack of papers in front of her. They were documents she had already discussed with a lawyer, a man who had listened to her story with sympathy but also with a pragmatism that unnerved her. "If you want to take legal action," he had told her, "you'll need to move quickly. Ownership has been in his name for years, but if your case is strong, you have a chance." That was why today, Mrs. Hoa had summoned all the courage she had left. At her age, Starting a battle like this wasn't something she ever thought she'd have to face. Her hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but her mind was sharper than ever. Sitting at her table with the phone in her hand, she dialed Min's number one last time, not out of longing, but to say the words she needed to say before cutting the ties completely. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. She had begun to expect it, the endless ringing that signaled he either wasn't willing to answer or had already decided to keep her at a distance. But just as her resolve seemed ready to harden further, the call unexpectedly connected. "Mom?" Min's familiar voice sounded on the other end, hesitant yet undeniably recognizable. For a brief second Mrs. Hoa's heart fluttered. It was instinct, not reason. "Min," she said, her voice steady but cold. "It's me. Are you busy?" There was an awkward pause before he responded. No, not really. Is everything okay? What's wrong?" "Everything?" Mrs. Hoa's laugh was bitter, the word laced with all the pain she had carried. "No, Min, everything is not okay. You know that. You left me in America and you haven't even bothered to call. What kind of child leaves his mother stranded like that?" Her words hit with a force that even she wasn't fully prepared for. The silence on the other end of the line stretched into an unbearable void before Min finally replied, his voice quieter now, almost defensive. "Mom, it wasn't like that. I had my reasons. Things were complicated." "Complicated?" Mrs. Hoa repeated bitterly. "No, Min. This isn't complicated. What is complicated is understanding how a child I sacrificed everything for could leave me behind as if I were nothing, as if I didn't matter." "Mom, I didn't mean to—" She cut him off, her voice rising despite her usual calm demeanor. "Don't tell me you didn't mean to, Min. You knew exactly what you were doing. You left me at that airport without any concern for how I would survive. Do you know what that felt like? Do you even care?" "Please, Mom," Min said, his tone shifting to desperation now. "We can talk about this. I'll come back to visit. I'll explain everything." "No," she interrupted firmly. "You won't come back. You won't explain anything. I've heard enough of your empty promises to last a lifetime. This conversation isn't about forgiving or forgetting. This is about moving forward." Mrs. Hoa took a deep breath, steadying herself for what she was about to say next. "I've spoken to a lawyer," she continued. "The house, Min, the one I gave you, the place you let me believe would remain in the family. I'm taking it back." "What?" Min's voice rose sharply, tinged now with shock and something like indignation. "Mom, you can't. You gave it to me. It's mine now. You signed the papers years ago." "Yes," she said calmly, though her fists clenched under the table. "I did, and I regret every single moment of that decision. I made it out of love for you, love that I thought you deserved, but what you've done, Min, what you did to me in America, you've shown me that I can no longer trust you. That house is my life's work. It's not something you can use to disrespect me." "Mom, listen to me." "No, Min, you listen," she snapped, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. "You made a choice to abandon me, to sever this bond between us. So now I'm making my choice. My house, my rules. I will not let my sacrifices fund your selfishness any longer." There was a long silence on the line, just the sound of quiet breathing on both ends. Mrs. Hoa blinked against the tears pooling in her eyes, refusing to let them fall. She wouldn't allow herself to break. Not now. Finally Min spoke again, his voice low and hollow. "Is this it then?" he asked. "You're just cutting me off?" "This is about more than cutting you off, Min. This is about protecting whatever dignity I have left," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "I've given you everything I could, but I won't give you the satisfaction of taking more. You made your choice when you left me. Now, I'm making mine." She hung up before he could say another word, her hand lingering on the phone as her tears finally fell. The pain of cutting ties with her own son was sharper than she had imagined, slicing into every part of her being. But underneath the raw ache, there was also a faint, unyielding sense of clarity. Over the next few weeks, Mrs. Hoa worked with her lawyer to reclaim the house step by step. It was a grueling process, laden with paperwork and countless memories she wished she could forget. Each decision reinforced her determination to regain not just her property, but her independence and sense of self-worth. For Mrs. Hoa, this was no longer just about the house. It was about reclaiming her life, her identity as more than just a mother, but as a woman who deserved respect, love, and most of all, peace. She had made her decision, and as painful as it was, she knew it was the right one. As she sat down at her table one evening, signing the final documents to transfer the house back into her name, a small smile ghosted across her lips. This wasn't just an act of defiance, it was an act of survival, For the first time in years, Mrs. Hoa felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Pride. Not in her son, not in what could have been, but in herself. She had stood her ground, and she had won. Starting over, the morning sunlight spilled through the bamboo blinds of Mrs. Hoa's modest little home, painting golden streaks onto the rough wooden floors. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Mrs. Hoa felt a subtle stirring deep inside her, a small but invigorating sense of renewal. There was no rush, no hurried demands on her day, no reason to sit and wait for anyone. What lay ahead was hers to decide. Her life was hers to reclaim. Mrs. Hoa sat at her table quietly sipping a cup of hot green tea, intertwined with the delicate aroma of jasmine. The silence in her home no longer felt heavy, not like before. It was tranquil, peaceful even, punctuated by the occasional chirping of birds outside her open window and the rustle of wind brushing the flowering trees in her garden. It had been months since she reclaimed the house, her house, and in those months Mrs. Hoa had redecorated not just the physical space around her, but the emotional landscape of her heart. For too long, she said aloud to herself, setting her tea aside, I lived for everyone but me. The words hung in the air, bold and unfamiliar. The memory of her son's abandonment still lingered, an ache that surfaced on the quietest evenings. But instead of letting it consume her, Mrs. Hoa had made a decision. She wasn't going to mourn what had been lost anymore. She was going to focus on what remained. Slowly but deliberately she crafted a plan to start over, to rebuild a life that held purpose and joy, this time, for herself. The first step came one breezy morning when she cautiously left her house and ventured into the heart of her small village seeking connection. In her grief, she had isolated herself so completely that she barely recognized some of her neighbors anymore. But Mrs. Hoa was determined to change that. She began small, greeting people, stopping to chat with the women selling vegetables on the roadside, offering little smiles here and there. "My goodness, Mrs. Hoa!" exclaimed Mrs. Lan, the cheerful baker whose shop was the heart of the village market. "I haven't seen your face in so long. Where have you been hiding?" Mrs. Hoa hesitated, taken aback by the sudden attention, but then she smiled, a real, unforced smile that lit up her face in a way it hadn't in months. "I've been finding my way back, I suppose," she said softly. "Well, it's about time," Mrs. Lan chuckled, pulling Mrs. Hoa closer. "Come sit. I've got some fresh banh mi that'll remind you why it's good to be alive." Mrs. Hoa let herself laugh, a sound that surprised even her, and stayed for tea and bread. It was the first of many such mornings, and soon, she found herself visiting the market daily, laughing with new friends and rekindling old connections. Joining the village's senior group was the next step. Though hesitant at first, Mrs. Hoa found herself drawn to the lively gatherings of elders beneath the banyan tree in the village square. The group met weekly, sharing stories, tea, and music. "We're hosting a handicraft workshop next week, Chi Hoa," said Mr. Tran, the group's organizer, his wiry frame and deep voice commanding attention. "We'd love for you to come. You've got that steady hand. We could use your skill." Handicrafts. The thought sparked something in her. It had been ages since her fingers worked a needle and thread with purpose. Mrs. Hoa nodded slowly. "I'll try," she said, though her nerves fluttered. When the day came, she arrived seated among a dozen others, handling fabrics and threads of all colors. Her movements were tentative at first, awkward, rusty, but the moment her designs began to take shape beneath her fingertips, she felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. She had rediscovered a small piece of herself. "You're a natural," Mrs. Lan said from her seat beside her, admiring the delicate embroidery pattern Mrs. Hoa had created. "You should sell these." Mrs. Hoa laughed, shaking her head. "Oh no, I don't think—" "Don't be modest," Mr. Tran interrupted. "This village would fight over pieces like that." His laughter was infectious, and for the first time in years, Mrs. Hoa felt pride, not in someone else, not in her children, but in herself. Taking care of her body came next. Mrs. Hoa began each morning with gentle exercises, joining a group of women in the park for Tai Chi. The fluid movements were awkward at first, but she quickly found rhythm in the practice. The group's leader, an elderly woman with kind eyes, noticed Mrs. Hoa's perseverance almost immediately. "You are strong, Chi," the woman said one morning as they rested under a sprawling tree. "You carry much, but you haven't put it down, have you?" Mrs. Hoa looked at her, startled by the simple honesty in the statement. "I'm trying," she replied after a moment. "You have already started," the woman said with a knowing smile. Day by day, Mrs. Hoa grew lighter. She still carried grief. It wasn't something one could set down all at once, but she now carried hope alongside it. Every interaction, every small step toward purpose, reminded her that life wasn't over just because one part of it had broken. She could rebuild. She was rebuilding. She spent mornings in her garden, tending to flowers she had neglected for years. She planted roses for courage, jasmine for grace, and orchids for resilience. Even in the tiny blossoms that bloomed, Mrs. Hoa found a metaphor for herself, a reminder that despite the darkness, beauty could thrive again with care. One day, a neighbor stopped her as she passed by, a young woman clutching an infant to her chest. "Bok Hoa," the woman began hesitantly. "We just heard about everything you've been through. You are so strong, so brave." Mrs. Hoa blinked, surprised. "I don't know about brave," she said softly. "I do," the woman insisted. "What you've done, finding yourself again after all that pain, it's inspiring. You remind me that life doesn't stop, even when it feels like it does." For the first time since her ordeal, Mrs. Hoa felt the rise of something warm and affirming within her, not the hollow pride of someone trying to prove something to others, but the solid confidence of someone who had endured and continued to stand tall. "Thank you," Mrs. Hoa said, her voice steady, and she meant it. Starting over didn't mean erasing the past. Mrs. Hoa knew that the pain of her son's betrayal might never fully disappear, but it didn't control her anymore, and it didn't define her. She had chosen to fill her days with laughter, community, and purpose. She was a seamstress again, an elder in her community, a friend to others, and most importantly, a woman learning to love herself for the first time. As the sun set over her little garden one evening, casting pastel colors across the horizon, Mrs. Hoa sat on her porch. She cradled a warm bowl of rice in her hands and gazed out at the flowers in full bloom. "I am still here," she whispered to the wind, a small, determined smile on her lips. "And for myself, that is enough." Healing within. For weeks, Mrs. Hoa carried the weight of the betrayal like a stone lodged deep within her chest. Though her life had begun moving forward, her house reclaimed, her garden blooming, and her days filled with new friendships and routines in the village, the pain lingered. It would creep in during the quiet hours just before sunrise, in the moments when no laughter or chatter from neighbors filled her home, or in the silence between the songs of the birds on her windowsill. It wasn't just the pain of being abandoned by her son, it was the confrontation with herself that haunted her. Years of giving everything to her children, sacrificing her dreams and happiness for their future, had left her with the question she feared the most. Who am I if I am no longer a mother they need? One evening, she sat on her porch watching the sun set over the rice fields. The fiery hues of orange and gold painted the sky and reflected in her eyes. Her jasmine-scented tea sat untouched beside her, the cup releasing faint curls of steam. For the first time in weeks, Mrs. Hoa allowed herself to think about Min, not his absence, not his betrayal, but who he had been in her life. She whispered to herself, her voice shaky and soft. "Min was my little boy once. Such small hands, so full of trust." The memories stirred emotions so raw that she felt her throat tighten, but she didn't push them away this time. She leaned into them instead. The memories came like waves, his first steps across the kitchen floor, his laugh as he helped her pluck mangoes from the tree in their yard, the pride in his eyes when he brought home his report cards from school. And then, the harder memories followed, how she had stayed awake many nights sewing by candlelight to pay for his books, and later, his tuition. The countless bowls of rice and soup she skipped so her children always had enough to eat. Mrs. Hoa's tears came uncontrollably. She pressed her delicate hand against her chest as though she could calm the storm swelling inside her heart. She didn't cry out of anger, it was grief. Grief for the boy she had held so dear and for the mother she had been, the one who always chose her children over herself. But she also felt something else stirring beneath the tears. Forgiveness. Not for Min's actions, but within herself. She whispered aloud, "You gave everything, Hoa. You weren't a perfect mother, but you gave everything, and now, it's time to forgive yourself for what you couldn't control." The following morning, Mrs. Hoa woke with an unexpected clarity. The sunlight streamed through her curtains, and instead of dreading the stillness of her home, she embraced it. The spaciousness of her house no longer felt empty, it felt like her sanctuary, her own place. Her voice came softly as she stood near her window, overlooking her slowly blooming garden. "Forgiveness starts within me," she said firmly, hearing her words as though they were the answer she had been searching for. Mrs. Hoa decided that healing herself required more than time, it required action. She remembered the wisdom an elder from her Tai Chi group had shared one morning in the park. What we cannot release we carry like a shadow. She started with something small. From a wooden box in her room she retrieved Min's old letters and photographs. The box was like a time capsule, reminding her of the years when they shared laughter and dreams. Instead of locking it away as she had before, she sorted through each picture and letter, allowing herself to smile and grieve in equal measure. One photograph in particular made her pause. It was a faded black-and-white picture of Min as a chubby-faced toddler in her arms. His wide smile lit up his tiny face as she kissed his cheek. For a moment she saw the boy he once was, not the man who had hurt her. "That boy," she whispered as a tear slipped down her cheek. "That's the boy I raised. That was my greatest gift." She tucked the picture back into the box gently and closed it with both hands. "I will carry the love, not the hurt," she told herself. In the days that followed, Mrs. Hoa found more ways to heal. She took long walks through the village, stopping at the riverbank to watch the water flow downstream. She imagined the water carrying her pain away with it, letting its gentle current cleanse her mind and body. She returned to her Tai Chi group and practiced with renewed determination. The fluid movements taught her to let go, the pauses between sequences reminded her to reflect, not hold on. One evening, Mrs. Hoa attended the village's small lantern festival. Lanterns of all colors floated down the river, their reflections shimmering on the water like tiny stars. Each lantern carried a wish, a hope, or a prayer, written by its owner. The elder woman who led Mrs. Hoa's Tai Chi class approached her, holding a soft green lantern with golden rims. "This is for you," the woman said, placing the lantern in Mrs. Hoa's hands. "Write your burden on it, then let it go." Mrs. Hoa hesitated, staring at the empty lantern. What was her burden? What could she even write? After a long pause, she picked up the brush and wrote 3 words in delicate strokes of black ink. Let it go. That night, as she released her lantern into the river, her heart felt lighter. Watching it drift away, she thought about how much she had carried for so long, her role as a mother, her identity tied to Min, her fears that she might never truly feel whole again. But letting the lantern float downstream, she realized she wasn't losing herself. She was finally opening herself to something new. Healing, Mrs. Hoa learned, wasn't instant. There were days when grief still caught her off guard, like a shadow stretching longer than expected. Yet, those moments no longer defined her. Instead, she filled her days with gratitude, not just for her new friendships or the quiet joys of her garden, but for the strength she had found within herself. She discovered that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering without pain. It was about recognizing that she could hold love for her son while also holding herself accountable for her own happiness. One day, as Mrs. Hoa sat on her porch drinking jasmine tea, she gazed out at the vibrant flowers blooming in her garden. A butterfly fluttered near her, landing briefly on a bright crimson rose before flying off into the horizon. "I am still here," she said softly, speaking to the butterfly, the flowers, and to herself. Her voice was steady and calm, filled not with the weight it once held, but with peace. "And I am learning to be whole again." In that moment, Mrs. Hoa realized healing wasn't about perfection, it was about progress, and she was making it, step by step, day by day. An unexpected confrontation. The early afternoon sunlight seeped through the gauzy curtains in Mrs. Hoa's modest home, casting soft slants of golden light over the wooden floorboards. She sat in her favorite bamboo chair near the window, her hands delicately holding an embroidery hoop. Threads of scarlet and gold formed the outline of a phoenix, symbolic, she thought, of her own rebirth after months of struggle and reflection. The radio in the corner hummed softly with the familiar tones of Vietnamese folk music, a soothing backdrop to her now peaceful life. As she worked, the quiet of her home was suddenly broken by the sound of a motorbike pulling into her yard. Startled, Mrs. Hoa paused mid-stitch, her needle hovering over the fabric. She wasn't expecting visitors today. Her brow furrowed as she placed her embroidery carefully on the table, brushing off the threads that had fallen onto her lap. Rising from her chair, she moved slowly to the door, her heart thudding softly in her chest. When she opened the door, the sight before her made her breath catch. Standing awkwardly near the gate, with his hands shoved deep into his pockets, was Min. Her son. The son who had left her stranded in America. The son who had broken her heart. "Mom," Min began hesitantly, his voice cracking slightly as he spoke. He looked older somehow, thinner, with shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. His normally confident demeanor was absent, replaced by someone who seemed unsure of his own footing. He shifted his weight uncomfortably, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of welcome or forgiveness. Mrs. Hoa stood in the doorway, her hands gripping the edge of the frame for support. For a moment she wasn't sure if she was imagining him. After all the pain, the endless nights of tears, and the months spent rebuilding her life, here he was. The sight of him brought a flood of conflicting emotions, anger, sorrow, longing, but also something she hadn't expected, a quiet determination. "You," she said softly, almost incredulously. Her voice was steady, but there was a sharp edge beneath her calm. "You came back." Min nodded, his face pale under the blistering sun. I wanted to see you, Mom. I wanted to talk." Mrs. Hoa didn't move from the doorway. Instead she crossed her arms against her chest and raised her chin slightly, her eyes narrowing as she examined him. "Talk?" she echoed. "After everything that happened, you just thought you could show up here and we'd talk?" "Mom, please," Min said quickly, his voice pleading now. "I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you, more than I can ever make up for, but please, just hear me out." Her shoulders stiffened at his words. She wanted to slam the door, to turn him away as easily as he had turned his back on her in America. But something inside her, perhaps that stubborn part of her that still, even now, loved her son, kept her from shutting him out. Instead she stepped aside wordlessly, letting him into the home he had once grown up in, the home he had so carelessly left behind. Min stepped into the small but tidy living room, his eyes taking in the familiar surroundings. The same wooden furniture, the same soft blue curtains, the faint smell of jasmine tea wafting from the kitchen. It was as if time itself had stopped in this house. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong here anymore. Mrs. Hoa sat down in her bamboo chair by the window, her movements deliberate and calm, as though she were bracing herself for what was to come. "Say what you need to say," she said simply, her hands folded in her lap. Min swallowed hard, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, I've thought about what I did every single day since I left you. I can't even begin to explain how sorry I am. At the time, I thought what I was doing was the best way to deal with everything. But I was wrong." Mrs. Hoa's brows furrowed. "You thought abandoning your mother in another country was the best way to deal with things?" Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of her pain. "Explain that to me, Min. Make me understand." Min flinched at her words. "Sarah and we were struggling, Mom," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "Our business wasn't doing well and the bills were piling up. We didn't know how to make ends meet. I thought—" His voice trailed off and he looked down at the floor, ashamed. "I thought bringing you to America would, I don't know, impress people, maybe make me look successful. But when things got worse, I panicked. I didn't know how to fix anything, and I was scared. Leaving you? It wasn't about not caring. It was about being a coward." Mrs. Hoa listened in silence, her face unreadable. Inside her emotions swirled, a mixture of disbelief, sadness, and anger. She had waited months for an explanation, but now that it was here, it didn't ease her pain. If anything, it felt like pouring warm water over a frozen wound, briefly melting the surface but leaving a stinging ache deep inside. "You were scared," she repeated slowly, her tone cutting. "No, Min, I was the one who was scared. I was the one left alone in a foreign place with no one to turn to. Do you have any idea how much I suffered?" He looked up at her, his eyes filling with tears. "I do, Mom. I think about it every day. And I hate myself for what I did. I'm not asking you to forgive me, not today, not anytime soon. But I want you to know that I'm trying to make things right. I've been working hard, paying off debts, trying to fix my life." Mrs. Hoa let out a heavy sigh, the fight draining from her shoulders. "Trying," she said softly. "And what does that mean for me, Min? What happens now? Do you expect me to forget everything?" "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "I don't expect that. I wanted to face you, to tell you the truth. And maybe if you let me, I can start earning back your trust." For a long while, neither of them spoke. The room seemed impossibly quiet except for the faint hum of the radio in the background. Finally, Mrs. Hoa looked up, her eyes locking onto her son's. "Min," she began carefully, her voice steady but firm, "I've rebuilt my life since you left me. I've found peace and purpose in ways I never thought possible. I don't need you to fix anything for me, but if you truly want to make amends, then you're going to have to prove it, not with words, with actions." He nodded quickly, gratitude flickering across his face. "I will, Mom, I promise." Mrs. Hoa raised a hand, silencing him. "Don't make promises you can't keep. I've heard enough of those. If you want to come back into my life, you start small. Understand me?" "Yes, Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She stood then, walking slowly to the kitchen where she poured herself another cup of tea. Her back was turned to him, but her voice carried across the room with quiet authority. Life doesn't give us second chances easily, Min. If you're lucky enough to get one, don't waste it. As Min sat in the quiet of his mother's home, the weight of her forgiveness, or the lack of it, settled heavily on his shoulders. He had taken the first step, yes, but he knew the path ahead was long and unsteady. Mrs. Hoa had learned to thrive without him. Now, he would have to prove that he could be worthy of stepping back into her world. For Mrs. Hoa, it was a hesitant beginning. Trust, she knew, was not something that could be rebuilt with an apology. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over her garden, she whispered softly to herself, "One day at a time." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. A new journey. The morning air carried a light crispness, fresh and invigorating, as the sun slowly climbed above the horizon, spilling golden light over the rice fields surrounding Mrs. Hoa's small home. Her garden sparkled with dew, and the scent of fresh-cut grass mingled with the delicate aroma of jasmine drifting from her kettle. Inside the house, she moved with a quiet confidence that had become her routine, as though each step, each moment of her morning was part of a sacred ritual she had crafted just for herself. For the first time in years, Mrs. Hoa didn't feel bound to the weight of her past. Instead, she felt lighter. The betrayal she had carried, once so heavy it seemed it would crush her, was now just a faint shadow trailing behind her, its hold fading with every step she took toward a new life. Today, she was ready to embrace all the possibilities that lay ahead. Mrs. Hoa sat at her neatly arranged wooden desk, an old but polished piece of furniture she had lovingly restored over the past few weeks. In front of her was a blank sheet of paper, a pen poised delicately in her hand. This was the start of something new, she thought. A new chapter, a new purpose. For months her life had been about healing, about mending the emotional wounds left by Min's betrayal and her abandonment in America. And she had done it, slowly but surely. She had reclaimed her house, rebuilt her routines, and rediscovered her passions. But now, Mrs. Hoa was ready for more. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, with intention. She began to write, the words flowing steadily from her pen. It was a small plan, modest like her, but it carried a spark of ambition nonetheless. She wrote about her newfound love for embroidery, and her decision to sell her pieces at the village market. She wrote about her hopes to travel to nearby provinces, to see corners of Vietnam she had never explored, and even perhaps to make peace with the idea of visiting distant relatives. Her pen paused only briefly as she wrote a final goal, to forgive completely, even when it feels impossible. The first step of her new journey began at the market. It was bustling that morning, the air alive with the sounds of vendors calling out their wares, and the chatter of neighbors bargaining over everything from ripe mangoes to fresh fish. Mrs. Hoa stood under the shade of a high banyan tree, her small table and chair set neatly before her. In the middle of the table she displayed her carefully embroidered pieces, handkerchiefs adorned with delicate lotus flowers, pillowcases stitched with intricate patterns, and small linen wall hangings featuring phoenixes rising from curling flames. "Mrs. Hoa, these are beautiful!" gasped a young woman clutching a toddler on her hip. She held up a pale blue handkerchief decorated with tiny, precise blossoms. "I don't think I've seen embroidery this detailed in years." Mrs. Hoa smiled warmly. "Thank you," she said, gently wrapping the handkerchief in tissue paper for the woman. "Each one has a story. That one is for healing, lotus flowers rising above muddy water." The woman's smile faltered for a moment, her eyes softening with understanding. "Healing, we could all use a little of that, couldn't we?" she murmured as she handed over a few crumpled bills. Throughout the day, Mrs. Hoa found herself connecting with her customers in unexpected ways. Each piece she sold wasn't just fabric and thread, it was an extension of her journey, a symbol of her perseverance, her pain, and her triumph over it. She saw her past reflected in the faces of strangers. The widow searching for something to bring color to her empty home, the young mother trying to build a new life, and even the playful child who marveled at the phoenix designs, laughing as he mimicked the bird's soaring wings. When the day came to an end, Mrs. Hoa packed up her table, her heart fuller than it had been in years. She hadn't just sold her embroidery that day, she had shared a piece of herself with her community. And in return, she had absorbed some of their gratitude, their kindness, and their own stories of resilience. Her second step came in the form of a letter, delivered to her home one rainy evening in early spring. The envelope was plain but sturdy, her name written in bold handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside was an invitation to share her story at a women's empowerment event in a nearby town. The event was centered on women from rural villages, encouraging them to embrace their skills, their unique journeys, and their ability to rebuild their lives however they saw fit. Mrs. Hoa hesitated at first. The thought of standing in front of strangers, of sharing the raw vulnerability of her experiences made her stomach twist with nerves, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized this could be an opportunity, not just to inspire others, but to continue her own path of growth. To prove to herself that the shy, insecure woman she had once been was no longer in control. When the day of the event arrived, Mrs. Hoa found herself standing nervously backstage in a room filled with inspiring women from all walks of life. Farmers, seamstresses, entrepreneurs, they all carried their stories like invisible banners, quietly powerful in their presence. As Mrs. Hoa stepped onto the stage, she gripped the edge of the podium tightly to steady herself. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and for a brief moment she felt a flicker of doubt. But then she spoke, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Good evening," she began. "My name is Hoa. I'm just a widow from a small village, just a mother who once thought my only purpose in life was to sacrifice for others. But in losing so much, I learned this: life does not end in heartbreak. It begins again when you decide you are worthy of healing." Her words filled the room like a gentle wave, ebbing and flowing through the audience. Mrs. Hoa spoke of her humble beginnings, of raising her children through hard work and sacrifice, and of the painful realizations she had faced when that sacrifice was met with betrayal. She didn't sugarcoat the pain, nor did she dwell on it. Instead, she focused on the strength she found in herself, in the small joys of her garden, in the friendships she rebuilt, and in the beauty of creating something with her hands. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Women approached her afterward, some with tear-filled eyes, thanking her for her honesty and courage. "You've given me hope," one woman said, gripping Mrs. Hoa's hands tightly. As her journey unfolded, Mrs. Hoa felt herself transforming in ways she never expected. She planned more trips, visited temples she had always dreamed of seeing, and even took a small group of local women under her wing, teaching them embroidery techniques she had perfected in her years of practice. Together, they created and sold items at the market, forming a tight-knit community of support and friendship. Day by day, Mrs. Hoa's life blossomed. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when grief nudged at the edges of her consciousness, but those moments no longer defined her. Instead, she was defined by her resilience, her grace, and her unyielding determination to live a life filled with meaning. One evening, as the sun set over the rice fields, painting the horizon with hues of lavender and gold, Mrs. Hoa sat in her garden surrounded by the fragrant blossoms she had planted with her own hands. She held a journal in her lap, the pages filled with plans, reflections, and dreams for the future. A butterfly fluttered by, landing briefly on the edge of her journal before taking flight again. Mrs. Hoa smiled softly, watching it disappear into the fading light. "This is only the beginning," she said aloud, her voice steady and full of quiet hope. "For the first time, my journey is my own.